Welcome to the Republic of the Rio Grande. Episode 11, the Casa Blanca Articles of Convention. I'm Brandon Seale. I'm such a sucker for constitutions and declarations of independences, and so I'm proud to include here my reading of the Casa Blanca Articles of Convention. As I said in the previous episode, this isn't quite a declaration of independence, at least not in the form in which the Anglo-American tradition thinks of declarations of independence. And it's also not a constitution. The Rio Grande Federalists had a constitution they were fighting for, the Constitution of 1824. But it is a statement of Rio Grande Federalist grievances and of their motivations. We don't have to take them all at face value, and we should recognize this as an exceedingly hastily drafted document. I think it's still powerful, however, and worth hearing. And I thank Professor Stan Green for uncovering it in the Secretary of Defense archives in Mexico City. And I thank Licenciada Jacqueline Pasquel for her notes to my translation, as well as Professor Green's. And so begins the, quote, report presented by the Executive Committee of the Convention and approved the 26th of January and finalized in Casa Blanca, end quote. Honorable Assembly. The Commission appointed to report on the measures which should be adopted in order to ensure the security and defense of the pueblos of the northern border of the Republic has the honor to present here to the honored general body the following report, which, for lack of time to detail with complete perfection this matter of utmost importance, has instead been forced to limit itself to the briefing of the vicious origins of the current government of Mexico, the enumeration of the insufferable evil which that government has caused on account of its illegitimacy, and a judgment on how to remedy to the extent possible the present anarchy in which the nation finds itself. Public and notorious is the fact that in the ill-fated year of 1834, General Santa Anna, by means of his proclamations most despotic and offensive to the sovereignty of the nation, destroyed the principle of representation and savaged the principle that, quote, the government exists because of the pueblos don't exist because of the government, end quote. From that moment on, we witnessed the legislatures of the states stripped of their sacred duty to attend to and remedy the complaints of their constituents because they feared falling to a similar fate as that of the National Congress should they incur the wrath of the omnipotent central government. This most dishonorable act, which amounted to nothing less than the state's total loss of freedom, wasn't the only thing that General Santa Anna had to do to establish the government he desired by means of force, because in those years the army was his and not the nation's. The states of Puebla and Zacatecas made great efforts to salvage their moribund liberties, but these were useless, perhaps because they decided to pursue their aims alone, which only had the effect of increasing the terror and fright permeating the entire republic. In the end, placing the resources upon which the nation depended to defend itself in the hands of a despot through the scandalous sale, if not theft, of the rich mines of Fresnillo, Zacatecas. With this act, General Santa Anna managed to disarm the nation and thereby multiply the power of his own arms, and without needing to physically coerce the many ayuntamientos lined up in support of the change of government. These illegitimate and reactionary deeds by a few chambers that declared themselves authorized to decree this change were the cause of the infamous decree of eternal damnation for all Mexicans, which toppled the government which had been freely and naturally formed in 1824, and were the spurious origin of the monster which now calls itself the government by deceit, and which has inflicted so many ills upon this nation. Since that unlucky time, the evils have only multiplied each day and increased the state of abandonment in which the pueblos find themselves. But what else could be expected of a government that owes its existence to the same pueblos whose interests it diametrically opposes? Little more than evil upon evil, violence upon violence, disgrace upon disgrace, and in some, the gradual destruction of the Republic, for which proof the simple enumeration of some of the misfortunes we have endured on this frontier will serve. An illegitimate government fears everything and focuses only on its own preservation. Similarly, the government of Mexico began by gutting the presidio companies, the only formal defense these states had against the savage tribes which daily harassed them, simply because these presidio companies were composed of frontiersmen themselves, in whom the government never had confidence. And so the government feared that if they left these companies under arms, sooner or later they would rise up against the government's illegitimacy alongside the pueblos. For the same reason, the government cut all funding and support for the local militias, by means of the same law which destroyed the republic, leaving the residents of the frontier even more entirely defenseless and at the mercy of the barbarians who had in many cases even managed to occupy the central plazas of these communities. Yet this too was not enough to calm the fears of the government, and so it was that the armies of the government returned to the field with the pretext of the Texas campaign and have maintained an army since of no less than 2,000 men in these tiny pueblos for the purpose of keeping them subjugated and in order to live off of their labor, destroying what little remained of their fortunes, and by this means remove from them any hope of crying out for the reestablishment of a true national government. To the same end, the central government dissolved the local governments of these pueblos and replaced them with political chiefs, jefes políticos, appointed by a prefect or sub-prefect without any familiarity at all with the pueblos or their people. And even to this appointee, they denied the power to repel the continuous attacks of the savages. Instead, whenever called upon for help, these so-called army garrisons answered mockingly, quote, "We didn't come here to guard a bunch of ranches. We came here for the Texas campaign," end quote. And how did that disgraceful campaign go? The convention will deal with that in a few words. Having already denied aid to the pueblos against the barbarians that were assaulting this region, General Filisola then published a sultanic decree that made it a capital crime for anyone to cross the Rio Bravo, and that all inhabitants should withdraw at least 10 leagues from that river, effectively forcing those with lands within 10 leagues of the river to abandon them. Having done this, the army began to send out parties with orders to murder and depredate those they found in that no man's land with Texas, which invited all manner of evil from the Anglo colonists and certain bad Mexicans who lived there only for the opportunity to come steal whatever they might find, given that everything had already been abandoned, and so whatever remained came to belong to the first one who took it. And all of these deeds placed so many of our belongings, the entire wealth of the pueblos in truth, in the hands of these evil men, and in the hands of the barbarians who proudly exhibited them on the other side of the Rio Bravo, and which ended with them delivering death to the honorable people of these communities, dragged by a desire to defend the property which had been taken from them by Centralist General Filisola, and instead turned into victims of his barbarity. This is the real result of the Texas campaign. And to what end did the government undertake such evil? They did it in order to impoverish and reduce into debased misery all of the inhabitants of the frontier. As has been mentioned, the majority of the people of Mexico raised their voices against the illegitimacy of the central government of Mexico. And despite all their efforts, the government still hasn't achieved their criminal objective. But because their just petitions have gone unheard for so long, the Rio Grande Villas finally raised their voice in revolt on the 3rd of November, 1838, even as they were surrounded by an army of 2,000 men. This story is well known by all, and there's no point rehashing it here, but suffice it to say that this revolution has increased in power and expanded the limits of its jurisdiction each day since. As such, it has now become indispensable to give great proper form and structure to our actions by the establishment of a provisional government duly empowered to provide for the security and defense of all the pueblos who have revolted, and that such government be pronounced in order to provide resources to the army and in order to take the measures necessary given the exigencies of the territory. The convention has considered this point with much deliberation, and in light of the necessity of action that the current circumstances require, and in order to give the greatest respectability to those dispositions, the drafting committee hereby submits for consideration to the Honorable Assembly the following articles. Article 1. The pueblos of the northern border do not recognize the legitimacy of the current government of Mexico. Article 2. Until such time as a national convention freely elected by the pueblos declares a form of government that better suits the republic, a provisional government will be established in these states. Article 3. This government will name a president and 5 property-owning individuals with 3 alternates to serve as a governing council, all to be elected by the current representatives of the pueblos. Article 4. The following shall be the responsibilities of this government. 1. Defend the territory from any enemy that should invade. 2. Protect the lives and properties of all inhabitants of this territory who have so long been abandoned by the current government of Mexico. 3. Raise and administer funds from inside and outside the Republic, guaranteeing such public debt with the goods and incomes of the nation. 4. Organize and maintain sea and land forces and any other force required to carry out the first and second responsibilities above. 5. Convene on May 28th of this year, 1840, or before if the circumstances permit, a convention of all the states that find themselves free of the oppression in which they currently reside, in order to form the government contemplated in Article 2 above. Article 5. In any financial negotiation, and in all such other actions which are not merely administrative, the President shall preside at the pleasure of the Council. Article 6. The citizens and authorities of the pueblos in revolt, and the officers and troops of its army, shall take an oath of obedience to the provisional government in the following form, quote, "Do you swear before God and commit to the pueblos to obey and succor with your lives and properties the provisional government established by the convention of these states, and any other such orders that should emanate therefrom," end quote. And if he so swears, he shall respond and answer, quote, "So I shall do it. May God grant us to see our homeland free, and if not, may God and man punish us," end quote. Article 7. The President of this convention shall receive the oath of the President of the government as well as those of the individuals elected for the Council, promising each to obey and see obeyed the present commitments agreed to by the pueblos. Article 8. He who opposes or in any way does not support the provisional government herein established forfeits his right to own property. Article 9. Any declaration made going forward by the force of the government of Mexico toward the pueblos represented here in their full and complete liberty shall be null and void. Article 10. Similarly, any act by this provisional government which contravenes the principles laid out in this document shall be considered null and void. Article 11. The government, as well as the council and their deputies, shall be personally responsible before the pueblos for the just and exact execution of their duties as imposed by this document. End of document. And with that, the provisional government of the Rio Grande was formed. Now, it was up to the folks who had declared that government to keep it. On the next episode of the Republic of the Rio Grande. Thank you for listening. In February of 2022, we'll be conducting almost a month's worth of fieldwork to uncover archaeological evidence for the location of the Battle of Medina, the largest battle in Texas history. If you want to learn more about the battle, go back and listen to Season 2 of this series. If you want to learn more about our search and our partnership with the 501c3 American Veterans Archaeological Recovery Project, go to www.brandonseale.com. Editing for this episode was provided by Susana Canseco. The portrait of Antonio Zapata that serves as the cover art for this season was created by artist Matt Tumlinson. Check him out at Matt_Tumlinson on Instagram. Sound engineering for this episode was performed by Stephen Bennett, who also arranged and performed the theme music. The theme music was actually written, however, by Mercurio Martinez, a Zapata County rancher, county treasurer, school principal, and descendant of one of Escandon's founding families. Martinez was the co-author of the first history of Zapata County, which he titled The Kingdom of Zapata, and in his spare time, he penned corridos. Well, I found one of his corridos in his collected papers in Texas A&M's Cushing Library, and in that corrido, Martinez had written a melody that he had intended for his Corrido de la Presa, the story of the construction of Lake Falcon and of his role in preserving what he could of the communities later lost to the lake. I love that we've been able to bring back to life this melody here, and I thank Stephen for it. You can check out Stephen's work at Noso Media, that's NOSO Media.com. I want to call out here for recognition the work of Juan Jose Gallegos. A retired NASA engineer, Gallegos went back to get a master's in history from the University of Houston and produced an incredible thesis dedicated to the life of Antonio Zapata, which in part inspired this season. Thanks as well to Professor Stan Green at Texas A&M University in Laredo. Professor Green actually has a book coming out soon about these events and others, currently titled Las Villas del Norte, a history from 1748 to 1821. Definitely don't miss the Museum of the Republic of the Rio Grande in downtown Laredo if you're ever there. They have brand new exhibits that they've just opened telling more of the story that we're recounting here. And if you're interested in the history or genealogy of the Villas del Norte, check out Moisés de la Garza's website, lasvillasdelnorte.com. Thanks additionally to Cesar Hinojosa, my touring buddy for these old towns in Mexico, and descendant himself of some of the first founders of the Lower Rio Grande. And thank you to Javier Cervantes with the Tapilán Coahuiltecan Nation and Juan Mancias with the Carrizo Come Crudo Nation for their guidance too. For more information generally, check out our website at www.brandonseale.com.